Hello and welcome to my Darkspawn faction guide. Darkspawn was added in Dragon Age Inquisition's multiplayer in the patch 9, along with the Silent Sister, although the Darkspawn didn't show up in game until today. This guide will showcase all the new enemy attack patterns, as well as noting all elemental weaknesses, resistances, and their immunities. So, Darkspawn is split into two mini-factions. The first is the traditional Darkspawn that you know and love, or hate, and the second is a new mini-faction, which was unveiled in the new single-player DLC, the Sha-Brytol. I'm probably not pronouncing that right, so apologies for that. Anyway, let's get started with the guide. First off, we have Genlocks. Genlocks are basic melee mobs which have two attacks. The first is a regular melee, and the second is a small charge which knocks you down. Genlocks do not have any weaknesses, resistances, or immunities. The next enemy is the Hurlock. These enemies come in two variants, the Archer and the Guard. The Archer is a reskin of the Venatori Archer, and the Guard is a reskin of the Red Templar Guard. The Guard does have vulnerability to electricity, otherwise neither enemy has any other traits. Next up, we have the Hurlock Alpha. This guy is essentially a reskin of the Venatori Brute in terms of its attack pattern, and he is vulnerable to electricity as well. He is immune to fear, sleep, being frozen, paralysed, weakened, and all physical effects, such as knockdowns or stuns. When he does use his Rampage ability, he will generate Guard. While this Guard is active, the Hurlock Alpha cannot be slowed or taunted, and he gains an immunity to all disabling effects. The Hurlock Alpha does have a special ability though. He'll perform a war cry, and all enemies around him will gain a buff, which makes them immune to fear, sleep, and being frozen, paralysed, or slowed. Next on our list is the Genlock Alpha. These enemies carry a large shield and a heavy ranged attack which ignores a portion of the user's armour. These guys also have a ranged knockdown attack in form of a ground smash, similar to Earth-Shattering Strike. This, however, can be avoided with a jump. Genlock Alphas are immune to fear, sleep, panic, all physical effects, and cannot be frozen, paralysed, slowed, or chilled. They do, however, have electrical vulnerability. Next is the Shriek. This enemy is identical to the Red Templar Shadow in terms of its attack patterns. The Shriek has immunities to fear, sleep, and being slowed, but otherwise has no other resistances or weaknesses. And lastly, the Emissary. This unit has exactly the same attack pattern as the Arcane Horror, though it does have the ability to cast Barrier on itself, and its attacks deal fire damage rather than the Horror's spirit. Emissaries are vulnerable to cold damage and are resistant to fire. They are also immune to sleep, taunts, fear, being frozen, burnt, or paralysed. Okay, so that's it for the first portion of the Darkspawn faction. Next is the Sha-Brytol lot, which shows up on wave 4. These guys are heavily armoured dwarves, which have 4 different unit types. First up is the Bolter. These guys are basically machine gunners. They're slow moving, but once they have line of sight on you, they will attack with bursts of projectile fire. These attacks are lethal. The exact mechanics I'm unsure about, though they do seem to have some sort of built-in armour penetration. What I can tell you though is that these guys cut through defences like hot arrows through butter. They do not have any resistances, weaknesses, or immunities, however, so you should be able to incapacitate them pretty easily. Next is the Defender. This is basically the Venatori Brute's little brother. It's vulnerable to electricity and immune to all disabling effects. It cannot generate Guard via Rampage, though it can do the same charging attack which will knock you down. The Stone Stalker is the next enemy in this faction. It's a Venatori reskin. The Stalker. It's immune to fear, sleep, and being slowed. One thing I did notice about this though is that it did seem to teleport into stealth aggressively rather than as a defensive move. And finally the Earthshaker. This is a very unique enemy which has 3 different attacks which all deal nature damage. The first is a projectile, and is kind of like those air cannons that you can get for kids, though this one actually hurts you quite a lot. The second will be performed if you get too close, and it's like an elemental version of Earth-Shaking Strike. This knocks you down. And the third is a ground smash, which kicks up tainted rocks which then deal damage on impact and then explode in a large area of effect, kind of like elemental mines do. These guys have a metric shitload of defences too. They're resistant to cold and fire, and are immune to sleep, fear, and being frozen, burnt, chilled, shocked, and paralysed. And that's it for the Sha-Brytol faction. On to the commander. The Darkspawn Commander is an Emissary Alpha. This dude is essentially the love child of an arcane horror, Calpurnia, and Samson. There's several jokes in there, but this is an educational video, so I'm not going to be the one to make them. The Alpha has the usual arcane horror attacks, but does have some extra moves too. First, you have a mini version of the Behemoth's Thunderdome attack, though this one pops up underneath you, knocking you down and any allies caught in its radius, dealing spirit damage in the process. It seems the Emissary Alpha is quite a stud, since he's also learnt how to use beam attacks from the Despair Demon too. His beam, however, deals continuous spirit and physical damage, though it does deal pretty heavy damage if not avoided, quite like the Despair Demons. The Alpha can also cast Barrier on itself, which also has the effect of chilling any ally nearby it. When this barrier is up, the Emissary can charge towards you in a Lyrium version of Fade Step, which does apply the chill effect to you. So, how do you kill this guy? Well, with difficulty. The Alpha has resistance to spirit and fire damage, and is immune to fear, sleep, all physical effects, being weakened, burnt, chilled, and frozen. However, he is vulnerable to electricity. Seems like the whole of the Darkspawn faction has some kind of vulnerability to electricity, so I would recommend taking electricity-heavy parties. So there you have it, my complete Darkspawn faction guide. Thanks for watching, goodbye.